Hi again, everybody. It's Laurie White from the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to episode number 83 of Chamber TV. And today we're talking about politics. What else but politics? A couple of days after the general elections, a lot of ground to cover both locally and nationally. And we have an expert with us today to talk us through all the machinations that are occurring here at the State House with the progressive movement and the change in leadership at the General Assembly, and also some perspective on what's happening during the vote counting process nationally in the wake of the contested election, if you were, that we're talking about today. Lots of states still up for grab. Nothing has been decided, as we know. But the path to victory is always a tricky one. So to take us through all of this, let's check in with our expert psephologist, and that is Wendy Schiller, the famed political analyst, and she is the Royce Family Professor of Teaching Excellence in Political Science and the Department Chair of Political Science at Brown University. So welcome, Wendy. Great to see you.
You too, Laurie. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing? How's your family?
We're good. We're working at home mostly, so that's good. And we have that option, which is also really good. And I just feel lucky to be in Rhode Island during a pandemic. I do. I think we've had really good leadership, and we've been doing our best to try to support local businesses as much as we can. And it's a beautiful place, and people are trying hard to sort of readjust. And I think it's nice to be in that kind of community. So we feel fortunate.
And how are your students faring?
I think they're a little frustrated. I'm teaching in person to a very small number of students in a very big room with masks up, and half Zooming some students and half in person, and that can be challenging. But they really crave some kind of interaction with each other and with the faculty. So they're struggling, and you don't blame them for struggling, but they're doing the best they can. So they're adjusting.
Great. That's good to hear. And I see your face and hear your voice everywhere. I turn on Bloomberg or CNN or any other lots of national and local media outlets. And you were busy this morning in Taiwan and other places.
Yeah, it's been really busy. Bloomberg, they're just like, oh, can you talk about this tomorrow? Can you talk about this today? So I like doing that, because the people who listen to Bloomberg sometimes get in touch with me separately, and they have a more business-oriented perspective, which is good for me because it teaches me something. They'll email me, or they'll say something you said doesn't ring true, or it does. And so I love it because it exposes me beyond political science and sort of punditry for politics to really the intersection of the business community with the political. And so I feel like it's been a good opportunity for me too to join that Bloomberg community.
So back in the day when we were in our cars, I would listen to Tom Keane every morning on Bloomberg Radio, and I would hear you from time to time. So I was always very proud that our own Wendy Schiller was all over.
I'm on with Tom Keane tomorrow morning at 8:45. I was on with Tom Keane at 5:30 in the morning yesterday, or 5 o'clock in the morning. He's funny, Tom Keane. He just loves the fact that I'm at Brown. So he just, every time he has me on, he's always talking about Brown. So I think it's good publicity for Brown, I hope.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening on the ground here in Rhode Island. So let's start with the General Assembly races. And of course, the big news is Speaker Mattiello's defeat. Thoughts on what was brewing all along with that?
Well, I thought it was probably a combination of a couple of things, which was that certainly the Fung name in Cranston is one that's well supported, and the Fung name statewide is well supported in Mayor Fung's 2 runs for governor. And I thought that gave Barbara Ann Fenton Fung a real leg up in challenging Mattiello. I think that the Jeff Britt trial, the timing of it wasn't particularly good for the speaker. And I think he did a good job trying to readjust his campaign, saying he was working hard for his constituents and he could bring home a lot of things to the district. But I think Republicans in Rhode Island were looking for a win. They were looking for a way to really sort of replicate the Trump sort of train, really, and get Rhode Islanders in positions where they could have big electoral victories. And this seemed like a pretty good one that was within reach in the right district at the right time with the right candidate. So I think that it strikes me winning the mayoralty wasn't a huge surprise for the Republicans, but in saying sort of we can in fact control a particular territory, and we can make a statement about the Republican Party by ousting the speaker. So I think those things all came together in one package, which I think explains his defeat and her victory.
What about the progressive wave that started to build a year ago in Rhode Island? How does that shake out now?
Well, I mean, I think you see an emboldened, I would say actually female element of the progressive wing of the party. I think when, Matt Brown and Aaron Regenberg and some other folks who are really trying to push the party, quote unquote, to the left, and you could say, okay, well, they didn't quite make it. They didn't quite succeed. But you certainly saw in the primaries women from different parts of the state sort of defeating long-term incumbents, men. And so it seems, that combined with Sabina Matos sort of taking over the Providence City Council and succeeding in that respect and having a lot more women on that governing body. So you really sense that women in Rhode Island, maybe led by Gina's, victory in her second, in her reelection, where she got a full majority, which was something people critiqued in the first election. So maybe just having her at the helm inspired women to get out there, even if they don't agree with her politically, just seeing how her success can translate. So I've been really impressed with the power of women in this state. And whatever their political views are, I think it's been great to see such a strong emergence of, there have been a lot of women who've been, Teresa Paiva-Wheat, there's a lot of women who've come before them, but we see more of them, and we see them across a wide range of political spectrum ideology, and we see them emboldened. And now we have somebody who's announcing that she might try to run for speaker, which would really upend the power structure, I think, in the General Assembly.
In terms of the potential next speaker, Leader Shekarchi is caucusing tonight with members of the House, and he appears to have strategically brought in a number of key legislators and is building a different kind of coalition than Speaker Mattiello may have, at least have been credited with. How do you see a Speaker Shekarchi being a different kind of leader?
Well, I think one thing about him is that, he's an inherently warm, likable guy, right? I mean, he's very friendly. He sort of, to me, epitomizes Rhode Island. He's just it's a Rhode Island guy, and he's more approachable. I think Mattiello, I always thought Mattiello was a good speaker in the sense that he really worked hard for Rhode Island. He always had the state's interests at heart, I think. I think he was, the car tax is controversial financially, but it really, really helps people, particularly at the lower income levels, not to have to pay that tax on their cars. So I think he actually did things that helped really strongly help some people, and particularly people who are working hard in Rhode Island. But his manner was always a little, sort of, I'm the leader, a little, not aloof, but a little, but Shekarchi's totally different. And he's somebody who probably has the exact same motivations, but just appears to be more open. And I think in that way, understanding that the party has changed, understanding that party will continue to change. This isn't a one-off, right? Women, particularly women of color, different voices in the party, younger. I think that's the future of the party. And I think that wing will grow. So if he's amenable and adaptable to that, I think he can perhaps succeed in his race. But it would be a sea change, I think, for the party to get used to. The way that things are maybe a little more transparent, a little bit less, insider trading. You might, even though that's what he's probably been trained in, I think the future of the General Assembly is probably going to be pushed more open than it's been before. And so he's got to prove that he's willing to go with that flow, in my opinion, or he, risks being upended.
Do you think it's fair to say that, when a leader gets into his or her particular role, that it's only a matter of time before they topple?
Well, Rhode Island seems to have, it's almost like the curse of the speaker. It's, but we've seen this at the federal level, right? We've seen Jim Wright in 1989 get ousted by his own party as Speaker of the House. Tom Foley lost the position in an election. He lost his seat as speaker. So you can see, and certainly Newt Gingrich was ousted. I mean, being at the top is a risky proposition. If you read your Shakespeare or your history, you know that, people are always gunning for you if you're at the top. So I do think it's a precarious position, but I think it's precarious because the forces in the Democratic Party in Rhode Island reflect the National Party. They are coming to a head. The people who want to reform things or change things and make them, I think, more liberal are running right into people who are used to a particular kind of Democrat, and they're going to clash. So whoever can manage that, seeming open, but also keeping folks in line to get things done, I think that's going to be the real trick to staying in power.
Do you think Rhode Island is fertile ground for receptivity to a progressive, very progressive leaning General Assembly? Will Rhode Islanders warm up to that or no?
I think the biggest obstacle to that is the budget and our economic situation. And I think people in Rhode Island, I'm not a born and bred Rhode Islander, but I've been here more than 25 years now. So, and I married a Rhode Islander, so I'm hoping that, puts me in the club. But I think that people here want to be successful. They're concerned for their neighbor. They want to have good schools. They want to have access to health care, but they don't want to pay a ton of taxes. And it's already a pretty high tax state. And I think that's the big trouble with the progressive agenda, selling it to Rhode Islanders in a more extended way. We're a pretty open state in terms of our benefit structure, but people want to be able to keep more of the money that they earn. I think that's instinctive. And I think when you have the National Republican Party really hammering that message, it gets harder to sell that to the majority of people, and even people who might support progressives, who might be better off, let's say. There's a limit to people and what they want to do. And we are going to have to make some hard choices given the economic pressures of COVID. Even if Joe Biden wins the presidency, we have a Republican Senate. They are not going to want to spend a lot of money. So they are going to be as, opposed to relief for state and local governments, you would imagine, as they were under Trump. So if Trump wins, I doubt that state and locals will get money either. So then you really run into a problem. If you're going to push for more programs and more programmatic spending and you don't have any money and you have to cut things, that's a really tricky thing. So I think that will slow the momentum down for the progressive agenda, at least in the General Assembly.
If you were to be advising Joe Shekarchi, and I'm being hypothetical, of course, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what would you say to a Speaker Shekarchi about how to maintain equilibrium?
I would say explain. Try, even in this time of COVID where we can't meet with a lot of people in person, just explain. Okay, well, we have a bad budget deficit. If he is elected speaker, we've got to make some changes and some cuts, and people are going to feel some pain. But I don't want to hurt the most vulnerable in our state. I don't want to overtax the people who are doing well, and I certainly don't want to overtax businesses because they've already taken a hit from COVID. But he's got to explain it all the time. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that Governor Raimondo, obviously spent a lot of time explaining COVID policy in the spring and early summer. And there was actually a study of women governors in the first couple of months of COVID, and it was in an Applied Journal of Psychology. And they basically say that the style of women governors was more successful because they explained. They constantly, now maybe they have to justify things more than male governors, but nonetheless, the way you speak about it, how frequently you speak about it, and how you explain the trade-offs you're making, I think that can be successful. I think people are much more open to doing things and taking some sacrifice when they think they know what they're doing it for. And I think people are very concerned about the business economy in Rhode Island. We're concerned about everything from service sector to restaurants to entertainment venues to bars, everything. And when you're thinking about the fragility of that economy, I think explaining what you're trying to do will be really crucial to that. And I think Rhode Islanders will accept a lot if they're really made aware of why the General Assembly or why the government has to do what it has to do.
I want to pick up on what you were saying about women leaders and thinking about, the trend and the shift and the psychological shift of, do people want to be governed by women? And was that a handicap? Obviously it was for Hillary Clinton in her presidential run, but it sort of cuts a different way locally with members of the General Assembly. And admittedly, I think Governor Raimondo maybe at the beginning of her tenure, not so thrilled to be told what to do by a woman, quote unquote. How do you see the arc of that preference starting to shake out now?
Well, there's two things, I think. Women of a certain age, all of a sudden, and I know this being a college professor, all of a sudden you become it could be their mother, or you could be their grandmother. And what was interesting to me was, whereas people were resistant to Gina in her first terms, or quote unquote being told what to do, in COVID, it was like knock it off, became a t-shirt, and she was sort of typified as the Italian grandma. And you sort of think, oh, okay, people are willing to take direction from a woman who seems to be in the role of caretaker, of someone who's taking care of people, taking care of the state, worrying about health, worrying about security. They're willing to do that because it brings them back to this role of women in their lives. And so that seems to work. And that was part of that study that I just mentioned. But the other thing is that younger women who are up and coming and who are challenging, obviously, members of the assembly and other places in Rhode Island, they're not bound necessarily by that, but they're also not viewed that way because they're younger. And so they are looked at as energetic, as charismatic, as sort of leading the charge. And that brings a passion and an energy. And they're not yet in a position of so much power that they're telling people what to do. I think this is going to shake out really in an interesting way for the race for mayor for Providence. If Sabina Matos decides she is running, I think she's either hinted or said she would, or she's certainly contemplating it, thinking about being told what to do by a female mayor in Providence. That will be a test of that. And so those are the two dynamics I think they run head to head. I think when you reach a certain age, people, particularly men and women, are willing to take direction from you in a way that they're not so much willing to do when you're younger.
Very fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. So we're live on Facebook, we're live on Twitter, we're live on YouTube, and we are talking with Professor Wendy Schiller, and she is the Royce Family Professor of Teaching Excellence in Political Science and the Department Chair of Political Science at Brown University, and our resident expert on all things political. So again, Wendy, thank you for being with us. So let's turn our attention now to what's happening nationally. Let's continue this theme of women in power, and let's talk about Kamala Harris to start off with, and what she brought to the ticket.
Well, I think Kamala Harris could have brought more to the ticket if the Biden campaign had let her. I felt like the Biden campaign, Joe Biden said in the debates, I'm picking a woman for vice president. And then it was sort of the female sweepstakes we saw for a while as he was vetting candidates. And because I think of the ascendance and the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and combined with Me Too, and then of course the tragic murder of George Floyd, and earlier in the spring, I think that just came to a head all at once. And it became clear, at least to the Biden campaign in their pursuit, that it should be a woman, quote unquote, of color. The African-American vote is crucial to the Democratic Party. And so he picked Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris had run for president, hadn't done all that well, actually, with African-American voters, just in preliminary polling, and then dropped out relatively early in the campaign process. Joe Biden, meanwhile, sort of ascended to the nomination by winning the South Carolina primary and generating a very, very large African-American turnout in that primary. After that, I think they didn't really use Kamala Harris all that much. They sent her places where it would be safe to go. And she did a lot of smaller events, I think, with donors and with women and with African-American women. But you didn't get a sense of Kamala Harris on this ticket. It was really all about Joe Biden versus Trump. And I think that was strategic because I think the Biden campaign realized they wanted older voters, they wanted male voters, they wanted white, Black, and Latino voters. They wanted this sort of manufactured coalition that was broader than the typical Democratic coalition, particularly suburban women and suburban voters. And you would have thought that meant, let's get Kamala Harris to the forefront. But I don't think they saw it that way. I think they saw it as a contained campaign between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And we'll see if that paid off. We know that in some cities, Detroit, for example, they had historic turnout, 50% turnout, and that was driven largely by African Americans. We're seeing in Philadelphia now, it's very tight. President Trump has a big lead, but Philadelphia is coming in overwhelmingly for Biden. And Milwaukee came in overwhelmingly for Biden in ways that look like they're higher than they were for Hillary Clinton. But we don't know if that's Kamala Harris because she's African American or because Joe Biden is popular with the African American community. And I wonder if they just could have used her more strongly. And there's a gender gap from exit polls that is almost the same size as the gender gap for Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton didn't win the majority of white women. She won the majority of college-educated women in 2016, college-educated white women. So we'll have to see whether this paid off either with women and or African Americans, young people. Kamala Harris wasn't the most liberal of all the choices he could have made. So it's unclear now that it made a big difference to have her on the ticket. We'll have to comb through all that data when we can get it about who voted and how.
Yeah, well, when Kate on Saturday Night Live develops a skit all around, Joe Biden and his ability to squeak it out, he's got a big thing going for him, and that's, he's not a woman.
Yeah.
So talking about women that supported Trump last time around, suburban white women, it appears, at least from some of the exit polls, that suburban white women this time around went for Biden.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like because the suburbs themselves seem to have gone either 57 or 62% for Biden across the country. Actually, in Atlanta, we're seeing that. In Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, the suburbs of Philadelphia, we're seeing that even in the Phoenix suburbs, apparently now in Arizona. So women are driving that. Suburban women, they are more likely to vote for Biden in all the polling than suburban men. But even suburban men are voting for Biden to some extent. So yes, I think that's been a really big deal, and I think women are driving that, and they're driving that. At least in the polling based on COVID, but also I think based on character. I think the way that Trump speaks about women or the way that Trump attacks women on Twitter and other venues, I think that just doesn't sit well with women. And if they have a choice between somebody who they think won't be that radical, won't be that liberal, won't raise their taxes too much, if at all, I think that's where they said, I'd rather tell my children about this person as president than explain the other person's behavior. So I think that comes from the unique experiences of being a woman and being a mother.
Yeah. Let's talk about the polls. Is there a disruptive force happening within the polling industry now? Even we could excuse it last time around, but twice,
people who run campaigns that lose, they get jobs. Right? You run a campaign, a losing campaign, then you get a job on another campaign. People do this for life. So I'm not expecting major pollsters to go out of business in any significant way. But I do think that once again, they didn't weight the poll exactly the way they should. So they first of all, Trump voters, real diehard Trump voters are now sort of being trained not to answer the phone. So they're not answering the phone. They're not participating in online polls. Maybe they do for Fox. But even Fox had Biden, 6 or 8 points ahead. The hidden Trump voter, I'm not so sure about. But I do think that, a lot of people said, I'm not going to answer. So I'm not going to be part of the survey, which means it'll inflate Biden's numbers. And that's an interesting thing because sort of maybe the Democrats let their guard down because they looked at these numbers, even though they shouldn't have from the Hillary campaign. But then a lot of pollsters wrote all these op-eds saying, oh, no, it's different. We're right this time. And they fell for that. Whereas the Trump campaign essentially said, this is a grassroots, on the ground, motivate our base campaign. His base was pretty small, 42%, give or take 3% margin of error. But he exceeded his base in the popular vote by about 3 percentage points. And that comes from getting people to go out there and knock on doors with masks on, or possibly in some areas without it, and getting people energized about Trump. Mm-hmm. And telling them the polls were wrong last time, he can do it again, which is exactly what we're witnessing. So I think it wasn't just that the polls were wrong in overestimating the likely voter, and B, overestimating the extent to which well-off Republicans or independents would vote for Biden. I never believe people will switch sides in an election. I think the best you can do is have somebody sit out an election if they're on the other side of the political spectrum from you. But I don't think people defect, not in this day and age. So the independents were estimated to go more for Biden. It doesn't look like that necessarily happened, at least among white men. So I think that's what happened with the polling. But also at the same time, Biden used sort of and maybe over-relied on polls and tried to safeguard his own health. He's 78 years old, stayed in the basement. People make a joke about that, but it's true. And that was a mistake. And I thought that was a mistake in the summer. I kept saying, I'm on with some local people, Gene Valcenti on WPRO on Tuesday mornings, and he would say, Biden's stuck in the basement. And I'm like, I have to agree that I don't think that's the way you win a presidential campaign, even in COVID. It's hard to get out there, but at least your volunteers, maybe younger people, could do it safely. And you didn't ever get the sense the Democrats were running a grassroots campaign. And Trump was always running a grassroots campaign. And Democrats win when they run grassroots campaigns. Obama did it. Clinton before Obama, that would be Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, particularly in the primaries, relied on a grassroots campaign.
But what does that mean in today's digital age, though? It means a grassroots campaign.
Well, see, this is the thing that the Trump people understood, that their base in particular, more rural, more white, and older, even though older people were polling even between Biden and Trump, that was just wrong. They turned out to have the same exact, I saw one exit poll, same exact margin that Trump got before, or even a little higher, leaning toward Republicans. So no drop off in older voters, which was everywhere in the polls leading up. It's basically understanding that they're less digitally dependent, that they will respond to a phone call or an invitation to a Facebook meeting, a personal invitation, if they're on Facebook, or a church gathering, even if there's only 15 people at the church, get a Trump person out there at the end of services. They understood that the base that they needed to turn out in really big numbers, which will likely give Trump his victory in Georgia, for example, in more rural areas, very 13,000 vote victory probably, or 12,000 vote victory, tiny, but those are those voters. And they respond to more in-person, more community-based contacting. Whereas the Biden campaign, probably has a more digital savvy, maybe tried to go for younger voters as well, and overestimated how much that will motivate somebody to get out the door, getting a sort of advertisement on their Instagram page or a text. Even though Obama did it through texting, they also did it through follow-up calls on the day of election day, right? Did you vote? Did you vote? We'll come get you. Did you vote? So I think the Biden campaign did a lot of television advertising and a lot of digital media, but that last step of really trying to find some way of reaching people who are not necessarily super digitally dependent, I think they didn't do as good a job as Trump.
Well, it's tough to follow up on a guy who takes "Make America Great" hats and flings them into the crowd after, at the time he was suffering from COVID. But let's talk about COVID for a little bit. Do you think the president, contracting the virus himself, actually made him a more sympathetic character? Do you think
I don't think this,
in any way, did it play any role in this?
Laurie, I think that it didn't actually make him more sympathetic, but I think it emboldened his base. It solidified their faith in him because he looks almost superhuman. He's 75, he's overweight, he doesn't eat healthy apparently, and he gets COVID. He's kept telling everybody it will go away, it'll go away. It's of course killed close to 250,000 people tragically in the United States, but he got it. And of course he got the best healthcare in the world. He got an experimental treatment that is not necessarily available to everybody else, but he recovered from it and went out on the campaign trail in an incredibly vigorous way. And no matter how cautious you want to be, if you're Joe Biden, that's going to motivate the base. And that's going to motivate people maybe who agree with Trump but didn't vote last time or don't usually vote. I think the other misinterpretation, and I was guilty of this too, looking at the early voting, between 23 and 28% of early voters were new voters. And I thought, wow, I guess, the Biden campaign is bringing all these people in, maybe younger, who don't like Trump, who are going to vote. But the Republicans were registering people all through the summer, and they turn out to probably get a bigger slice of that pie. And part of it is, here's a guy who's not afraid of COVID, who's getting out there, who's survived it. So maybe we can all survive it, and it's not something to be afraid of. Medically, it's so hard to know who's going to get really sick from it and who's not. And for that reason, I think we all have to be cautious and careful, wear masks, and practice social distancing, because you don't want to make somebody else sick. And maybe they have the genetic composition to withstand it, and maybe they don't, but you don't want to take the chance. And that's never been Trump's motto, but I do think that getting it, surviving it, and then going out on the campaign trail really vigorously, I think that motivated some people to get out the door for him that would not have otherwise voted.
And he only missed a few days. The whole thing was
like barely a week. Yeah.
It's all very mind-boggling to watch, and I guess that's That's 2020 for you, right? All these things that you think.
Yeah. And I think, I think he was
true.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said all these things that you think can't possibly, happen and be true, that he's going to walk out, I'm going to go home and I'm going to be at the White House. I'm going to be at the rally. I'm going to be at the debates. It's like, no, you're not, like people are dying.
And he also, Trump can actually be self-disciplined when he wants to be, and he doesn't feel he has to be all the time, but he was for the second debate. And debates rarely make a big difference. But if he had been, I thought he was very dominating in the first debate. I actually thought he won that debate because he soaked up all the airtime by interrupting Biden. And he apparently really did badly in polling amongst women in that first debate. If he had brought that same activity to the second debate, that might have tilted the race a little more towards Biden for people who were on the fence or thinking, oh, I don't really want to listen to this for 4 more years. But the thing that will be really key here is that we know from the popular vote, the president increased his share of the popular vote numerically. And also, if Biden wins, he's not going to win by much more than Hillary Clinton, which is just really a surprise when the economy is faltering in some parts of the country and we've had COVID.
So it was either, it's very clear, the polarization of America, nothing has really changed. In fact, it may become more embedded, more entrenched.
Yes, but for me, the good news in this election in terms of polarization is that it's spreading evenly. And why is that good? It's good. So everyone sort of thinks, oh, the New England area is liberal. Well, Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island are very different places. And there's a lot of difference in public opinion. New Hampshire has a Republican governor, for example. Maine just reelected its, my computer is acting up, so I'm going to snooze it. So we don't get shut off. So hold on, folks. It's not letting me. All right. I'm trying to snooze this message thing, but that's okay. So if we get cut off, I'll sign back in. So the thing about it is that Trump, for all the things that you think about, right? When you think about these sorts of issues, and you think about the campaign and you think about Trump, I'm trying to think of the right words.
It's spreading evenly, we say.
I think I'm trying to think about the Trump effect on polarization. Is that so? In Georgia and Arizona, for example, there is a far more strongly contested situation going on between the Republicans and the Democrats at the partisan level than ever before. And Texas, even though Trump won by 6%, it's lower than his percent in 2016. So when you think about that, it's spreading evenly, meaning people think of New England, they think of California as liberal, right? But the West is coming, that liberal Democratic tilt is coming further east from the West, including Nevada, possibly, and Arizona, and spreading into Texas. And then it's going to Georgia and North Carolina. North Carolina is about the same as it's always been, but Georgia is really contested. That means you're still entrenched in polarization, but it's spread to more states, which means more people are getting involved in politics. And the arguments for each party can be presented to more voters in America because it's not geographically segregated to a couple of states that are really red and a couple of states that are really blue. So I think that's what's interesting to me. What 2020 tells us is that more states are getting more politically competitive between the parties. Maybe not so much Rhode Island, but they're getting there. But when you think about it, that's better for America. It's better than to have these voices segregated in states you never visit, so you don't ever hear the other side. Now I think more Americans will be confronted with the other side in a greater number of states moving forward. And that may ultimately cure part of the ills of polarization if at least people are talking to each other, even if they're on the other sides of the fence. They're at least conversing, hopefully, and presenting their arguments. So I think that's a good thing from this election.
What do you think foreign nations are thinking, talking about, speaking about, at least public?
Well, as you mentioned, I was actually on a panel with folks in Thailand today, in Bangkok, early in the morning. It was pretty cool. Thank you for technology. And there was a professor of international relations who said, listen, America's not looking like a good bet anymore, right? Because America is looking too contentious. It's looking unstable. It's looking, as if it just can't get its act together. So why would you want to go invest in America when you're not sure of the stability of the regime. So when Trump comes in, he makes business-friendly policies, theoretically, reduces regulation, which he's done, renegotiates trade agreements, but lends an air of uncertainty and instability to international relations. And I think business doesn't like instability or uncertainty. They don't like unpredictability. So yes, maybe he'll be good for business, but since you don't exactly know what he'll do, particularly with tariffs and trade and sanctions, it's harder to plan. And the idea that the parties are so divided that when a Democrat comes in, they undo the Republican side, and then when the Republican comes in, they undo everything the Democrats done. If that continues, that's just very seesawy. And I think if you were somebody trying to invest here or start a business or come study here, for example, you say, oh, I'm going to send my children to study in the United States at, elite educational institutions, perhaps. Well, I'm not going to do that because Trump is now taking away visas and my kid could get stuck or, not allowed to come back home or vice versa. So I think the uncertainty and instability is not a good thing internationally for the country. Even when the domestic policies of the president, international policies of the president seem business friendly, I think, the Republicans have to find a way to add more stability to that policy program.
What will happen to the ACA?
I think the Supreme Court is likely to strike down the mandate. I think John Roberts ruled on sort of a technicality that it was within the power of Congress to impose a tax, and that was sort of the mandate. You didn't have to buy anything. You got taxed if you didn't purchase it. So I think that, but then Trump has now ceased enforcing that. So now there's no effective practice of using the power of Congress to tax in the ACA. It's really a problem for Republican states. Arizona, Idaho, Utah, Kentucky, for example, are just a number of states that have expanded Medicaid, the low insurance program for low-income people, through Obamacare. And they're covering hundreds of thousands of people with federal subsidy for that. If you rip that out, it's not just Democratic states or liberal states that will suffer. It's a lot of Republican-run states with Republican governors, some of whom are up for re-election in 2022. So I think that becomes tricky politically for the Republicans, not to mention the 11 million people who will be without health insurance. What will happen is states like Rhode Island will have to absorb those people and support their own exchange. I don't know how you do that, but you're going to have to do that because you can't leave all those people without any health insurance. That will cost you way more money in the long run. So I think states have to gear up and start thinking, what will we do? I don't think that decision comes down until spring, and we'll see. Had there been a takeover of the Senate, then Congress could have passed something that would replace it. But now there isn't a takeover of the Senate. So even if Biden's president, I don't know how he actually tries to fix this at the local level.
Yeah. So in the few minutes that we have left, let's dive into the what's happening in the House and the Senate. And there was an expectation, at least Speaker Nancy Pelosi was really bullish on the idea that they were going to pick up even more seats. And on the Senate side, the idea that it was going to get close, somewhat close to flipping and picking up seats. So what happened there?
It was a big fail on the part of the Democrats. And I think, again, it was the actual turnout. Trump turned out, more voters in these contested districts that stuck with him than the Democrats anticipated. I think they thought that some of these voters would be demoralized because of COVID or have lost their faith in the president. And I think that really made them believe that the Democrats would get out the door because they're motivated by anti-Trump sentiment, but that the Trump voters would be slightly demoralized. That would give them the edge, and it didn't. And in the Senate races, I think it backfired on them that Biden was so far ahead in the polls. I think a similar thing happened with Hillary Clinton in 2016. Democrats or independents, or who were thinking, okay, I'm going to vote for Biden. I don't like Trump, but they lean Republican, these voters. They stuck with their Republican senators. So we now, I think, Georgia's uncertain now, but certainly Susan Collins, she's a Mainer. She defeated Sarah Gideon way more with a bigger margin than anybody expected because Biden did really well in Maine for Biden's totals. I think people said, well, we don't really want a Democratic government. We don't want all three chambers to be controlled by the Democrats because I think Trump was more successful at painting the Democrats as liberal, as socialist, as too far left. He kept saying radical left. And you think, oh, well, I'll shrug that off. But if you say it enough, it sort of plants a kernel of doubt in the voters' mind. And I think people who voted for Biden in some of these states ended up sticking with their Republican incumbent.
Yeah. So we could talk about all of these things, until midnight. Just a couple of more questions, because I know everybody in Rhode Island loves the political talk, and who better than you to talk to about this. But speak a little bit about the unexpected strength of the Hispanic voters when many of them were the target of Trump's vilification.
Well, Latinos, the great thing also about Rhode Island is that we live and breathe and have great experience with a very diverse set of Latino voters. And we've had Latino government officials. Obviously, we had a Dominican mayor in Providence, and then we have someone from Guatemala originally of those origins. We have a strong Puerto Rican contingent that's pretty powerful in this state. So that's just three sort of quote unquote nation of origins for Latinos, and they were born here. But when you think where you come from, Rhode Island is a state of immigrants. Someone says, where's my ancestry from? That's what you ask everybody. But Latinos are not monolithic at all. So in Florida, South Florida, the Trump campaign did much better. They do well with Cubans, but also Venezuelans and Brazilians who didn't like the idea of a large government or a socialist government. And I think you're seeing in Arizona, on the other hand, that Biden's doing better with Latinos who are from Mexico, who may feel the brunt of that Trump rhetoric against undocumented much more so than other people from different Latino heritages. So I think it teaches America, but also particularly the Democrats, that Latinos are really a very varied group. And that to think all Latinos will identify with undocumented people in this country, who, by the way, aren't at all even all Latino. There's plenty of people from all over the world who are undocumented. I think that's a mistake too. Because I think if your family's been here for 80 years, just because you're Latino doesn't mean you identify with people who have come more recently and they're undocumented. So it's a big lesson, I think, for white voters. I think it's a big lesson for white politicians, in particular in the Democratic Party, to understand that people have business interests, they have small business owners, they want security, they may be more socially conservative. I think it's a big learning curve, I think, for the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. So the fear of a socialist dictator or a socialist form of government is more unpalatable to than the fear of the wall or documentation or because many of them are citizens already anyway.
Exactly. So if you're voting, you're a citizen. So if you're a citizen, unless you maybe got the amnesty deal in 1986, it's a long time ago, 30 years, you consider yourself a citizen here. You don't necessarily see anything in common with people who are coming over the border undocumented. And that's really, really important. Also, abortion is a big issue in Latino communities. Certainly, a lot of Latinos identify as Catholic or evangelical in the South and Southwest. And I think that's a big issue for them. And I think also Democrats underestimate that because they don't seem to quite get that kind of conflict. Now, remember, even if Trump gets 35% or 37% of Latino vote, the Democrats are still winning the vast majority of Latino votes. So the Democrats still have the edge. But when you're counting 10,000 votes here and 15,000 votes there out of 160 million cast, that's where it makes a difference when you don't properly gauge where you're going to get your support from.
So we are recording this conversation on Thursday, November 5th at 3:32. So anything can happen in the next couple of hours. But Wendy, for those of us that are watching you in real time, either on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, what should we be looking for in the next 24 hours?
I've been using Fox News as my base to look at the vote count, because I think if any news outlet is friendly to the president, it would be that news outlet. So trying to get a gauge of where they think the race is going. And we were going to look for Arizona, which is releasing a lot of vote returns this evening, quite a few, I think about 9 o'clock Eastern time. Nevada released a few today, but they say they won't really be done, they don't think, till Saturday, Friday or Saturday. So a slow drip from Nevada. Biden has a little bit more of a lead today than he did yesterday. Pennsylvania should be done, I think, by next week at the earliest, but the vast majority of votes are counted in Pennsylvania. President Trump has a healthy lead right now, more than 100,000 votes. And I personally, I will be maybe proven wrong. I think that's a big hurdle for Biden. No matter what you tell me about absentee ballots, that's a big one to cross, I think. So, and Georgia is about to finalize today, and President Trump has a very, very narrow lead there. But that may be exactly what decides these states across the country. The issue for President Trump is if you have a narrow lead in one state, and then you're contesting a Biden lead, which is slightly bigger in another state, but it's pretty small also, it's kind of hard to reconcile that fight. So we'll have to wait and see how this all comes in. But there's still ballots that are still coming in some states that are accepted. And, this is going to come, it feels like 2000, but just at lots of different states, not just Florida, where it's really going to come down to, a couple of thousand votes in a huge turnout election.
And the ultimate timing of this, when it finally comes to fruition, we get closure, when will that be?
I can't imagine, unless Joe Biden gets a miracle in Georgia and can win it, because I think most of those votes are counted already. But if he can win that state and keeps Arizona and wins Nevada, then I think he gets a big enough margin where people might say he won. If he wins Pennsylvania, which I also think is a big hurdle for him, then I think, again, 300, Trump won with 306 electoral votes. People just said, all right, you won. So I think it's much tougher if it's 270 or 279. That's a hard thing. That'll be tough. And of course, I think it could go to the Supreme Court, but that's only if there really are sort of clear violations of federal campaign law. I think that's going to be very tough for the court to overturn the results of an election. So we may be looking at early December. It has to be done by December 14th. The Electoral College meets. I think that's a hard deadline. I think the Supreme Court's aware of that. So I think we're looking at something like 2000, unless Biden somehow can find some more votes in Georgia and Pennsylvania.
Fascinating. It was great to speak with you, Wendy. You have so much energy. You love this. I can tell that you're just, you're on fire talking about these issues. And so I presume you've been up for the last, 48 hours?
Yeah, 48 hours, pretty much. Yeah. So
love it.
Maybe tomorrow night I can go to bed early, I hope.
What do you love about it so much? What is it that gets you all, fired up?
I have a lot of belief in this country. I think the United States of America is still the greatest country on the planet, and we have a lot of failings and a lot of flaws, but we have the capacity and the opportunity to constantly address them and constantly try to improve them. And I just think we're a nation that has welcomed everybody from all over the world for a couple hundred years and, made a life of big differences and knit together a fabric that keeps us together. And I just believe in it. And I think that like I said, it's flawed. It's got some problems, but I think it's a great country where you can hash this out. And if we work hard enough to preserve our rule of law and preserve our electoral rules, the way we do things, we've got to really stick to that. And really try to give everybody in the society who wants a chance. We're not there yet either, but it's just a vibrant, open society that can always self-improve. And I think that's why I like it. I like talking about it, and that's why I believe in it, either at the microcosm Rhode Island, but also just the country. So it would take a lot to push me off that perch.
Okay, well, your students are lucky to have you, and I know your students and students all across the state that are studying political science and really getting into what the fundamentals of democracy are all about, and the First Amendment and all of the pillars that are embedded in our Constitution. So vitally important, and it plays out in real world scenarios, just like we're talking about today. So we thank Wendy Schiller, the Royce Family Professor of Teaching Excellence in Political Science. So you can see where excellence is in abundance with Wendy and her very, very piercing way of, really dissecting the issues and making it clear and understandable for all of us. She's also the department chair of political science at Brown University. So Wendy, I hope you'll come back again on Chamber TV at some point.
I'd love to. Yeah, anytime.
And we'll go over some more of this stuff. And see where it takes us.
Maybe we'll know who the president is. So, all right. Take care, Laurie.
Get some sleep. Take good care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.